welcome to the SaWGuy podcast. As always, I'm the SaWGuy. And with Halloween right around the corner, I'm starting to see on some of these movie channels, or these TV channels, well, some movie channels, I won't lie, they're planning to do horror movie marathons. And some of the films they pick have been okay. Other films, I'm just like, what the fuck are you thinking about? That's not horror. And you're like, really? So I figured, fuck all that noise. I'm going to do my own top 5 list for everybody to enjoy. For obvious reasons, I know people my age, y'all have kids, y'all have your own family. So I'm going to make a second list because I didn't forget about you either. SaWGuy doesn't forget, right? So without further ado, I'm going to give you my list, and then I'll give you some honorable mentions to watch, and hope you'll enjoy this, right? So out of my top 5 favorite films I like to watch for Halloween, I'm going to go pretty quickly on them because, you know, I don't want to break them in too detail and spoil it for y'all. But my first film that I would watch would be The Shining. The Shining with Jack Nicholson and Stanley Kubrick directing. That was a true classic. A very slow, methodic horror, but it hits the point home. You know, it really does. It's one of my favorites. I like watching. Jack Nicholson's so fucking iconic on it. He really is. So The Shining would be one of the main ones I would watch, right? The next one I pick, it's a little oddball one. Everyone would probably not put this on their list, but I'm going to put it on there. It's a film called House. It stars William Catt. It basically follows this guy who, he's a veteran of the Vietnam War, and he becomes a successful writer. He has his own family. His son ends up going missing while they're living with his aunt in this haunted house. And she wasn't crazy the whole time. She was basically saying, hey, this house is haunted. This house is haunted. And, you know, without spoiling the movie, a lot of things happen. The best way I could describe this film, it's more or less, it's got an Evil Dead approach, because the people who worked on Evil Dead worked on this film. The people who worked on Friday the 13th worked on this film. So it's a really good, underrated film, you know. So I usually like to watch this because, I mean, it gets you in the spirit of Halloween. It really does, you know. That's my second film that I would watch. My third one would be The Houses That October Built. I would say, because there's a sequel to it, there's part 2 and part 1. They're both on Hulu right now. If you get a chance to check them out, I'd say watch them both because they're both fucking amazing. The whole story basically follows a group of guys and one of the guys' girlfriend. They rent an RV, and for the whole month of September and October, they go through local haunts, you know, all around the United States, you know. It's something that I would love to do on my bucket list, but not in the way that they did it, because they go in one haunt, they piss off these people, and they follow them through, and then, you know, it ends, like, on an open note, and then you see the sequel, and it's like, whoa, what the fuck, you know, and it's a great film. Especially puts you in the mood for Halloween, because it talks a lot about going to these haunts during Halloween and all that, so that would be my number 3 film to watch, just in case, if you guys wanted to see something that's tied in with Halloween, right? So, and then with any Halloween or horror movie marathons that you would do, you have to include one of the big 3, whether it's Leatherface, Freddy, Jason. In this case, I'm going to include a Jason film, right? My favorite Jason that I would watch in a marathon with a group of people and hanging out, having a good time, would be Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. Because this one isn't slow. This one it gets straight to the point. Like, in the first 5 minutes, Jason's already awake and kills everybody, you know? But I love that aspect, because it ties in a little bit of the story that Tommy Jarvis, he's gone crazy, he wants to see that Jason's dead. He snaps and puts a pole through him, lightning strikes Jason, and then he becomes reanimated. Great, great film. It has nothing to do with Halloween, as far as aspect of, like, taking place around Halloween. But what they did is that they made a they made a short version of Jason just doing what he does best, you know. And that would be the best one I would pick out of this bunch, you know. I really would. So that's my 4th film right there. My 5th film, I'm not going to be cliche and follow this whole trend of everybody saying, oh, the top 5 films you should watch for Halloween, and then end it with Halloween. Because for me, like I said, that's too cliche. And I don't do that shit. Not at all. I'm going to give you my favorite horror film that I would watch as my top dog one. And it goes with this tagline. I'm pretty sure most of you guys would know it. If it's Halloween, it must be Saw. And I know a lot of people are like, what the fuck are you talking about? That was the original tagline for the Saw films, Saw 1 through 3D. So from 2004 to 2010, that was the tagline they used every year, because they would release them every year right next to Halloween. And the reason why I say the first Saw film is because it's one of the most brutal films out there, you know, and it was one of those films that changed horror films forever. You can go back and watch that film, and then you see all these horror films after 2004, and you'll see how Saw changed that whole aspect. It basically opened the doors to show more effects, more gore, better storytelling, things like that. And to this day, Saw will always be my favorite go-to one to watch. Now, there is some honorable mentions, and I'll get to those in a bit. But now I'm going to start the kid-friendly list of, you know, if you got a family, you got little ones, and you don't want them to get too scared on some of these films. I get it, you know, I understand. So without further ado, and with that in mind, I'm going to give you my list on this. Some of them are pretty obvious. My top one that I would tell kids about would be Ernest Scared Stupid. In the 80s, kids, we had this character named Ernest. He was basically a guy who would be on this commercial for Kroger Foods, you know, random commercials. He got so popular, they gave him movies. And he had his own movies where he goes to camp, he goes to jail, he goes to Africa, you know, like random films like that. But they did one called Scared Stupid where he, you know, he fights off these trolls, these goblins during Halloween. It's kid-friendly. It really is. I mean, there's some subtle things in there, but, I mean, it's very kid-friendly. I grew up with it, and look how I turned out, right? The SaWGuy. So that'd be my number one on the list. Number two, everybody knows this one because it's beaten down like a dead horse. Nightmare Before Christmas. One of Tim Burton's finest work that he's done. They overplay it so much now. Ever since 2003, like in the 10th anniversary, to now, it's getting overplayed. But I mean, it's still cool because it opens up these, you know, the newer generations into following Halloween and horror films and stuff like that. So I still put that on my list as the number 2 film to watch. Number 3 is another Disney classic. It was a TV-made movie. It's this big thing going on right now at Spirit Halloween because they're the only store that has it. It's Hocus Pocus. And I put Hocus Pocus on my list because he had good acting, because he had Bette Midler, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Kathy Naomi, who voices Peggy Hill in King of the Hill. They play 3 witches, and they basically, you know, were stopped, and then they come back because they lit the black candle. These kids lit the black candle. And they're basically witches from colonial times that come in, and they're trying to, you know, get a kid to sacrifice. They don't say sacrifice, because obviously it's a Disney-made movie, but it's very good kid-friendly. There's no anything crazy about it, but it's a true horror classic if you were my generation, grew up during that time. So I would put that in there, too, as my list. Another one that I would say would be Monster House. It was kind of an oddball one that came out in 2012, I believe, or 2011, maybe even 2010. It's one of those films where it's mostly CGI. It kind of looks like Pixar a little bit. But it follows how this old man, he lives in this haunted house. His wife had died in the house, and she was very bitter, and she didn't have any peace, so the house was haunted. Anytime, like, kids would lose a ball over there, the house would eat it and stuff like that. It was funny little kooky shit. And I would recommend that one because, you know, that's still family-friendly. It's still kind of Halloween-ish, you know. So that would be my 4 right there. You know, my 5th one, since we're talking about movies, I have to include this true icon horror classic. One of my favorites that I grew up with. And, you know, this is the movie that I try to get every kid involved to see. It's Monster Squad. I say Monster Squad because in the 80s, no one really cared too much about this film when it was first released. But later on, it became this true cult icon classic. Because it basically follows the whole aspect of the Universal horror monsters. So you have you have the Dracula, who's the vampire. You have the creature from the Black Lagoon, the Mummy, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman. You have all 5 of those characters being led by Dracula, and they're trying to find this amulet, and they're trying to use all their superpowers to take over the world and stuff like that. And you have these kids, they're supposed monster hunters, and they have their own book club. They have their own fan club and stuff like that. And so they're basically trying to save the world from these evil monsters. And it's this kooky little 80s horror film. It's one of my favorites, personally. Like, if if I had kids, that'd be the first film that they watch, would be the Monster Squad. Because, you know, it's live action. It's not, you know, cartoons or anything like that, but it's funny, you know. It shows the original aspect of the Universal Horror Monsters. And what I love about it is that that's how you get kids hooked into it, you know, for Halloween. Because when you think of Halloween, you obviously think those 5 main characters from Universal Studios Horror Monsters. So I figured that's one of my favorites, and that would be my top 5 for the kid-friendly list. Now, it doesn't go without mentioning, I know a lot of people are probably commenting right now, well, you forgot all these... Yeah, I know. Don't worry. Come on. I'm SaWGuy here. I'm going to give you some honorable mentions so you all know, you know, which other films that you could watch that are just as great. Obviously, I already said the original Halloween. But what I would say, instead of watching the original Halloween, take this year to watch Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. Because Halloween 3 had nothing to do with Michael Myers. It was basically, after Part 2, John Carpenter wanted to do it as an anthology, do a different story for each one. The first one he did was Halloween 3, and it had to deal with killer masks, right? These kids would wear it, they would hear the signal, and then it would just basically melt their faces off, or melt them down, or kill them, right? And it's a good story. It's a great film. It's very long. I would say it's close to the 2-hour mark, and there's a lot of slow parts to it. But it's a good film. It's a good psychological thriller. John Carpenter at his finest, you know. It's such an underrated film. Everybody hated it because it had nothing to do with Michael Myers. But now it's finally getting the attention that it deserves. So I say, if you get a chance to, check that one out. That's one of my other favorites. Trick or Treat. I'm not talking about the original one. I'm talking about the one that came out in 2007. That's the one that was kind of like, I guess you could say it's very Quentin Tarantino style. It starts off with the ending, and then it builds into like everybody's different day and their timeline of what they did for Halloween and stuff like that. And it all comes together as one big story, and then it ends, right? Such a great cult classic. And because of this film coming out and being such a cult classic, other films started to follow too. You know, you have Tales from Halloween, which is okay. It's more corny. That's why I prefer Trick or Treat. And you had other ones like Southbound and all these other stories kind of tied into it. But what I like though is Trick or Treat was the original one that started it. And, you know, my motto is if something's great the first time, why fix it, right? If it's not broken, don't fix it, you know? So, check out Trick or Treat. That was another good one. I'll go through the list pretty quickly because I know I'm explaining way too much in all these films. And I don't want to spoil it because people will be like, oh, great, you know, spoil the fucking movie. But here's my other list that I wrote down, right? Dead Alive, Peter Jackson's classic, you know, that has to do with zombies and shit like that. I like that because... I'm not a horror comedy guy at all. Y'all know me. But I can do that one because there's a lot of effects and everything into it that ties it in. That makes it good. Exorcist. Now, I didn't put Exorcist on my list because, you know, Exorcist is one of those films that might be too scary for some because it depends on what you believe in, you know. I talked a lot about that in my first ever episode of the SaWGuy podcast. Tune into that if you want to know my thoughts. Children of the Corn. Another Stephen King classic right there. You know, Linda Hamilton, these children being possessed by the devil and stuff like that and shit. You know, good film. Evil Dead. If you're going to watch Evil Dead, I would say Part 2 because basically Part 1 and 2, like 2 is a remake of 1. That's basically what it is, you know. So I would see either Evil Dead 1 or 2, whatever you feel comfortable with. Army of Darkness, that's a great great movie to it too. They have a television series which is okay, but not really Halloween-oriented. My other favorite one, if I want to go really dark, is Hellraiser, the original one, 1 and 2. Sometimes 3. 3 is really good, but, you know, slow and methodical, but really good. I like those. Night of the Creeps, that is another one of my favorite, which also stars, you know, Tom Atkins, who was in Halloween 3. Great film about these little slithering monsters from aliens. Well, aliens. They're aliens that come down. They're little slither monsters. They turn people into zombies and shit like that. Pretty cool movie, you know. Great effects to it. A little quick tidbit. I know with Night of the Creeps, the person who did that, Fred Decker, he also did Monster Squad. So you can see the similarities between those films. Great 2 films, by the way. Pumpkinhead, that's another one of my favorite classics. We all know Pumpkinhead. House of a Thousand Corpses, because it does take place during Halloween. If you have to, like I said, you have to include one of the big 3s. I already said Jason, But if you got to include a Freddy one, put in the Dream Warriors. That was another one of my favorites because it's very streamlined, kind of like Jason 6. You know, Freddy comes out and then boom, it's already starting the whole Freddy storyline. You know, so part 3 would be one that I would say check out. If you want to go a little bit more creepy, you could do Insidious. You know, Insidious scared the fuck out of me for a little bit. But it ended up being one of my favorite films because it plays in that whole aspect of things. You know, like when you go to sleep, does your soul travel kind of deal thing, you know? If you like musicals, I know people are going to say, well, why don't you say Rocky Horror Picture Show? I don't like the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Some people do. I don't. But I would say Rocky Horror Picture Show if you like musicals. Another one I can recommend would be Repo, the Genetic Opera, which is, to me, I would prefer that over Rocky Horror Picture Show any day of the week, because Repo, the Genetic Opera, was a little different. It was a movie that tied in with music and all that stuff, and you had decent acting into it, too, you know. I know people are going to say, well, Paris Hilton was in it, but that was the only film that she did really good, was Repo, the Genetic Opera, and you don't see much of her in that, so I liked it. And then, of course, I have to end it with these last 3 big ones. It's one of my favorites. Rob Zombie's Halloween. I would say, yeah, that one. But I was trying to shoot for, because you'll see this list. Wrote a shitload on this list. But I meant to say Rob Zombie's 31, because 31 takes place during Halloween, right? In 1978 of 31. There's rumors speculating that that's tied into the whole Devil's Rejects world. I'm not sure, but 31 was a great film if you want to go just like straight brutal and do Rob Zombie style, you know. My last 2 honorable mentions would be the original Chucky, Child's Play, which still holds up to this day as the creepiest one out of the whole bunch. And then there's that remake coming out now. And I laugh at this one because this one's one of my true favorites, Scream. And why do I say Scream? Because it follows these 2 crazy horror fans, and, you know, they try to follow what the movies do, you know, for horror films. I mean, it's a wink to every major horror film all the way up until 1996 when the first film came out. Or, yeah, because the first film came out in 96, so it follows all the horror genre from before that. But it was really good. I like watching Scream because it takes place all, I would say, not during Halloween, but around that fall time, you know. And I like watching it because, you know, personally for me, there's so many of these horror movie marathons that come on, and the one thing that I don't like is that they'll be like, oh, okay, we're going to do a whole Saw marathon. So we'll play Saw 1, Saw 3, Saw 4, and Saw 3D. And it's like, okay, well, whatever happened to Part 6 and Part 2? Like, what the fuck? You know? Like, I hate that. I really do, you know? If you're going to do a whole series marathon, play all the movies. But some, obviously, with licensing issues, you can't do that. So, you know, I'll watch them myself, you know, and things like that, so that way I'm in tune with it. But I know there's other horror movie marathons. I grew up with a lot of them, like the TNT Monster Vision. Those were some great classic times. They actually brought him back, you know, so if you never heard of Jimbo Bob, he's on, what do you call it? He was the host of the TNT Monster Vision. He's now back on Shudder, so if you are a real diehard horror fan, sign up for Shudder, because I know he's doing something big, and the rumor has he's going to do something for Halloween and do like a horror movie marathon. A lot of other things that I like about some of the other movie marathons is, you know, AMC will do some good ones every now and then. I'll never forget that they did one in 2001 called Monster Vision, and, you know, what was pretty cool is that they would, this is old school. They would show, like, the movie scene, and then they would go to a commercial. And then if you're on your computer at the same time, it will pop up a question. They'll say, what do you think is going to happen? Right? You answer the question, and then the movie plays the scene, and then it will say, you are correct. And they played off on the aspect of, you know, if you get so many points, you would win an Xbox, the first original Xbox. Yeah, that's old. That was 2001, I know. But that shit was amazing. They don't do stuff like that anymore. So what I like to do during this time, you know, for Halloween, I'll play a lot of horror films generally, you know, for the show. But typically, those 5 films that I mentioned, my top 5, those are usually my go-to ones that I put in, especially during this time, now that it's September and everything. So, for the kid-friendly ones, I didn't give my honorable mentions, but I'll give it to you real quick. I would say the Goosebump TV shows. I wouldn't recommend the movie because I don't like Jack Black at all, and for me, he kind of killed it for the whole Goosebump aspect of it. The TV show Are You Afraid of the Dark? Nickelodeon did great back early in the 90s with this TV show. Had a lot of great themes, taught kids, you know, right from wrong and stuff like that. I would check that one out. The Witches with Angelica Houston, where she plays as a witch and all the witches come together and they turn the kid into a rat. That was another really good one. And then also I had another one. Oh, Frank and Weenie. That'd be another good one. I say Frank and Weenie because it's all black and white. Some kids may not like it because, you know, it's black and white, but it's very Tim Burton-ish, you know, because Tim Burton obviously did it, but he did it in his aspect of his vision, and it's good. It really is. I enjoyed it, you know, and I'm not a kid anymore, but for kid-friendly ones, those are my honorable mentions. But hope you all enjoyed this segment, you know. I went through some films quick, some of them I went through detailed, but I didn't want to spoil anything for you. But hope you all enjoy these films. Hope you're enjoying this year's Halloween for the year of 2018. Let me know in the comments if there is films that you suggest that I should watch, you know, or what you like to do, or what you like to watch, you know. I'm always interested to hear what you guys think. I wouldn't be the SaWGuy without you guys. So thanks again for everything, and I'll catch y'all next time, as always.